This is Invested in Climate with Jason Rissman. I see climate as the world's biggest, most diverse, most important movement in human history. Millions of people dedicate themselves every day to protecting the planet. This podcast shares conversations with advocates, entrepreneurs, investors, policy experts, and anyone else that can push our thinking about what's possible and what needs to happen to address climate change. If you have ideas for episodes or feedback, get in touch on LinkedIn. If you enjoy the show, please leave a rating on Apple or Spotify. I'm currently building a new venture. It's related to storytelling and how we engage all sorts of folks in meaningful climate action. If you have expertise in this area, big ideas, or examples of something that's really working, get in touch. Thanks for listening and for doing whatever it is you're doing to support climate progress. Okay, let's get started.
So a regenerative economy simply generalizes that idea to everything else. What if we had an economy where basically the harder it goes, the healthier it gets? Like ultimately, there can be no greater purpose to any economic activity than making the economy healthier. That seems like a self-evident truth.
Hi, everyone. Imagine for a moment if economic activity made nature and society healthier. It's a notion that at first might seem absurdly idealistic. And then, when you think about it, may be essential for our survival, and thus perhaps what the goal of an economy should actually be. Welcome to the concept of regenerative economics. There's a growing number of leading thinkers, organizations, policymakers, and even businesses fueling the regenerative movement. With AI and a new geopolitical order creating massive disruption, it's an important time to consider bold visions for the future, and regenerative economics deserves some attention. Today, we're joined by someone who's both a bold visionary and practical implementer. Eugene left his dream job at Google in 2020 to found Work on Climate, a community that now has helped tens of thousands of people looking for ways to address climate change. Eugene sees communities as mind-bogglingly effective for scaling impact. By helping people realize their potential as climate leaders, Work on Climate is harnessing the power of community to work towards a regenerative economy. Eugene is a guy of big ideas who thinks about systems strategically and makes things happen. I had a blast talking to Eugene and suspect you'll enjoy as well. Here we go. Eugene, welcome to Invested in Climate. So great to see you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jason. I'm very excited.
Well, very fun to see you. Twice in a week, we got to attend a really interesting dinner on animism earlier in the week, and fun to know that you're a neighbor in Berkeley. So I'm looking forward to seeing you around.
Indeed. Yeah, and I think we're both also going to be at the other one with John Fullerton, which I'm also excited for.
Hope so. Eugene, I've gotten to hear a bit about your background and the founding story for the organization you lead, Work on Climate, and it's a wonderful story. So I'm going to ask that you set the stage for us today by rewinding way back in time, long before you were doing what you're doing now. Tell us where you grew up, how you started your career, and what was most important to you back then.
Yeah, I grew up in Russia. My career started, for the first 15 years of my career was very simple. It was all in tech. That started from my early teen and even preteen years. So I was always interested in, math and science. Then I went to this middle school, which was focused on math and physics and computer science. So that was really fascinating to me. And that's what I continued doing for the next 15 years of my career. So I was working as a software engineer. I was building various, data processing systems, later on AI systems at Google. That was tremendous fun. In terms of what was important to me, I think this is something that I carried with me to this day. So I've always felt like I'm chasing this feeling of insight and of beauty. So whatever problems I was approaching, I tried to think about it until something pops into my head and oh my God, a divine insight has come. I see that the problem is breaking into 1,000 little pieces that are each much simpler to solve. And it felt really like I'm not really that religious, though I would say I'm spiritual, but it always felt like contact with God in a meaningful sense. And this actually ended up being the same feeling I felt when I came across the concept of regenerative economics. But one more thing I want to say is, so what was important to me is this pursuit of insight. This is what always motivated me. But at some point, an additional thing started motivating me. At some point when I was maybe 15 or 16, my godfather asked me to help with some calculations, and the calculations were related to quantum physics, which was his specialty. So he needed these calculations done in a particular system called Mathematica. Doesn't really matter that much. The point is that it's based on this relatively unusual at the time programming paradigm called functional programming. I had the feeling. So I was really fascinated by how powerful and different it is, how it felt like strikes at the core of whatever computer science was to me all about. So I got fascinated with it, and I started applying it everywhere. I started making friends in this area. I started building side projects. This brought some really unexpected joy. So I wasn't doing it to advance, my career. I didn't have a career at that point, or like I wasn't thinking about it in this way. I was doing it just out of pure joy. But what it ended up giving me so many, nerd friends with whom I was bonding about that. It ended up giving me, probably even more importantly, the self-identification as a leader, even though I wasn't calling it that at the time. So it got me out of the space of finding my path in the world to the framing of building my own world. That was also another thing that has always motivated me from that moment onwards in all of my work.
Thanks, Eugene. And we will certainly circle back to hear more about regenerative economics and why that was so inspiring to you. About 15 years ago, you landed a job at Google, which I imagine changed your life in many ways. Would you mind sharing what getting hired by Google felt like and what it meant to you and your family and those around you?
Yeah, at the time that I got the Google job, I had been interested in large-scale data processing for a long time. I've been reading, various papers and technical blogs of all the tech companies at the time. It just felt really cool. And the team whose work I respected the most was the Google data processing team. Imagine my amazement when when it turned out that this is exactly what Google wants to hire me for. My intellectual idols, so to speak, who built the work that I really admired. It felt awesome, honestly. It felt like I get to dive even deeper into the nature of reality together with other people who have dived deeper than anyone else. It was really cool. When I actually started working, first there was the feeling of intimidation, like, oh my God, I'm not smart enough to be with these people. What am I doing here? But this is an experience that I've had many, many times over the course of my career. It always starts like this, like I'm a nobody and look at these people. And then you start chipping away at it and like, yeah, they're cool, but I'm pretty cool too. And now I'm cool in a different way. Now we all have something to offer to each other. We all respect each other for different reasons, but respect each other greatly. So gradually I found my niche in there and built some pretty stuff that in a technical sense I'm proud of. In a sense of, honestly, its impact out in the world. I don't think it's been positive in the end. At the time I thought that it was, but at the time it felt awesome. And it was also, at the time, a company where I met a lot of people who were morally inspiring for me. At the time, it was a company that stood for something. And there were many, many people who also really stood for something and were visibly fighting for those issues. And that was inspiring to me as well.
And fast forward 7.5 years, you not only left Google, but you left engineering and you reinvented yourself as a nonprofit founder. What happened? Why the big change?
Yeah, I think around maybe 2018 or 2017 was when I first learned that climate change is a potentially concerning thing. At the time, I learned about it from my partner at the time, who was an environmental science PhD. The first time I heard about it from her, I just swatted it away because it was too doomy and too gloomy and too scary. I felt a lot of resistance, so just kind of ignored it. Next, I think, and I ignored it for a while. Then I think maybe in 2019, I was flying on a plane from San Francisco to Zurich, where our team at Google was based, half of our team. And I watched The Inconvenient Truth. It really started scratching my head. It was a little bit less intense in its narration, but what it was saying was just as intense. So somehow it broke through my defenses. Then I watched the sequel on the flight back. Then I started talking to people I meet about these issues. Google actually has climate and energy scientists in-house. And I came across one of them at a random professional development workshop and asked, Dave, is it true that it's that bad? And he was like, yeah, it's pretty bad, Eugene. Someone better do something about it. So my concern gradually grew and grew. And then during the height of COVID, when everyone was having a crisis of meaning, I was like, that's enough. I can't morally justify to myself working on something that's not connected to solving this crisis. And serendipitously, at the time, I discovered that my colleague, Cassandra, was also feeling the same thing. So I saw that she posted on Facebook something about like divestment from fossil fuels. I hit her up and said, hey, I'm actually in the same headspace. I'm actually thinking of quitting. And a week later, we actually quit. So we one-upped each other and we accelerated each other's path. So that was the path to exiting the former identity. And I think it's illustrative in the sense that, like, while it's just you being the only crazy one, it's very difficult to make this kind of shift. Because on this side of the chasm, you are a big deal. You're someone who spent your whole career learning how to do this well and bonding with other people who do this. And on the other side, you're a nobody. But it turns out that it's sufficient to have even just one person with whom you're not a nobody anymore. And then when we actually quit, the reaction was kind of unexpectedly thunderous and viral. Both of our goodbye notes went viral, and hundreds of people started emailing us saying that they also are feeling the same thing and want to work on climate, or they were saying that they're already working on it, but they want to help us and people like us. So there was this like wave of warmth and community and joy and embrace, and it was really shocking to me in many ways. I think one of the ways in which it was shocking to me is that I had no idea at the time what solving climate change actually looks like. I just knew that I can't be spending my whole working hours not figuring it out. And then when we met all of these people who are building solutions, and somebody is maybe plugging methane leaks in abandoned oil infrastructure, somebody is doing like green bonds for clean energy projects in the global south, somebody is making an alternative concrete, somebody is like assessing climate risks and this way stabilizing the financial system. So all things that I had no idea were even a thing. And I was just starry-eyed, like, why isn't this on the front page of New York Times? Why are we still talking about it in the sense of doom and gloom? So that was also an inspiration for starting work on climate, because we wanted other people to have this experience of community that helps you rapidly untangle your identity from an outdated one, and also have other people have this experience that of inspiration that solving climate change is actually. It not just can be, it is about building. And it is about rebuilding every sector of the economy.
That's great. Eugene, tell us more about work on climate. What problem did you initially focus on, and what sort of impact has it had?
Yeah. So initially, the paradigm was exactly this, that there is so much work to be done of a nature that most people don't even realize, and most people don't realize what this work looks like. And on the other hand, there are so many people who want to do the work. So we were like, let's put the two and two together. Let's help professionals realize that they can build climate solutions and go and like work for somebody who's building them. So getting people into climate jobs. And it worked really well. I think what we built really hit different because it was completely focused on this narrative of building rather than a narrative of doom and gloom. And honestly, now I think there are merits to both, and there's a lot more depth to it than a dichotomy between positive or negative. But positive worked. So it really worked, and the community rapidly became the largest community in the world of this sort. By now, it's about 40,000 people in the community and several thousand. So our latest impact report just came out. Somewhere between 3,000 to 6,000 people credit us with beginning to do the climate work that they're doing today, depending on degree of role that we played and the type of work that we're talking about.
Congratulations. That's incredible.
Yeah, it is pretty substantial. And if you do any kind of, back of the envelope calculations of the, economic value of talent, it is probably 100 to 200 times more than the money we spent to build this. So it is communities are disproportionately just mind-bogglingly effective. It's just that their effectiveness is often not of a nature that our current system is able to recognize, but it's there. So it's been really powerful. And also we help thousands of founders. And I like quoting a couple of stories. So one of them is the story of these two guys, Rich and Kenny. Rich Warden and Kenny Lee, they met each other as co-founders in the community, and they ended up building iGen Robotics, which is a robotic solar-powered agriculture company that dramatically reduces the need for fertilizer and has all kinds of other climate and resiliency benefits. And so they met in the community, and then lo and behold, they raised something like $20 million by now, which like this story alone has attracted 10 times more capital than we spent. And this is just one of thousands of stories.
Work on Climate gets equity for a startup that gets founded, right?
No, we don't. We actually, so the way the community works is people just organically meet each other and learn from each other and so on. And we don't have control over each interaction that happens, right? So it happens organically, which makes it somewhat difficult to measure what's going on, but it makes it completely impossible to capture exactly what is going on, right? So that is one of the challenges.
And it's worth describing how it's organized. You're a nonprofit. How are you supported? Why don't you walk us through a little bit of just what the organization structure is?
Yeah. So how the community is organized. There is a Slack community, but even more importantly, there are many workshops and events that we host, both virtual and now increasingly in person. There is a mentorship program where you can just book time for free with experts with whom you can talk about, like, hey, here's what I do. Tell me about how someone like me can have an impact in your industry. So we have this variety of programs. We have a couple of other smaller programs that we've been trying. And overall, just all of these programs are intended to bring people together. And because when you bring people together and build connections between them, they end up together discovering their paths and helping each other discover their paths. So this is how it's organized from a program standpoint. Organizationally, it is a nonprofit, so we're funded completely philanthropically. We're funded by a lot of people who are just inspired by our work and recognize its potential, both individuals and foundations, about half and half, I think. For example, our largest funder is the Cisco Foundation. The Tom Cat Foundation, managed by Tom Steyer, and Kat Taylor also gave us some support recently, and so on. Relatively even healthy mix. We don't have much of an earned revenue. So far, we haven't been able to figure out how to make this model make its own money without compromising its integrity and impact.
Eugene, you got it started in a moment where there was just incredible growth in funding, attention, and opportunities for people wanting to work in climate. And some of that has slowed, particularly the job growth. And I believe it's caused you to develop other approaches as an organization. Will you tell us a bit about how work on climate strategy has evolved with the changing job market?
Yeah, the change in our strategy actually happened at the same time as the change in the job market rather than being caused by it. So the changes in the job market more like validated that we were on the right track. What really happened is that as we were developing our work, which at the time was framed as essentially closing workforce bottlenecks in climate, we thought that because there was work to be done, if we just get enough of the right people to do the work, progress will happen. And we started increasingly questioning this narrative. Like we were starting to ask, are we actually doing impact that is additional, or are we just making sure that it is our people who get those jobs and not other people, while really someone else could have also done that job? We started asking, can you really create systemic change by getting people into jobs? And there is no good answer to that. So you can accelerate implementation that's already underway by getting people into jobs, but you cannot change the nature of an industry. So ultimately, the climate crisis, I think the final straw for me was when I listened to this podcast by Daniel Schmachtenberger. It was a podcast where he was introducing the concept of the polycrisis. The concept of the polycrisis, the way that I understand them is the polycrisis is kind of the bad news that we're facing so many different crises, each of which can end us, and we're not nearly on track for solving any one of them. We're facing so many of them that we stand no chance of solving all of them one by one. The good news, so to speak, is that these are the same crisis, the meta crisis. So it is a crisis that our system is just structured in a way that health is invisible to it, so it can't optimize for health. All right, and it's causing all kinds of, so it is optimized for efficiency, and efficiency is causing all kinds of arms races and tragedies of the commons, and that is what's creating the climate crisis. For example, the climate crisis, it's not actually good for anybody in the long term. In the long term, nobody's going to have any business but because this is invisible to the way that the system operates, it cannot optimize for avoiding that risk. The same is the case for all of the other crises. So as I pondered this, it was really scary. I had a big sinking feeling, and it was increasingly clear that you can't really do much about this by getting people into jobs. It's just the wrong tool. But you can do something about this. If you want to do something about this, you need leadership and not just implementation support. What I mean by leadership, I don't mean action by top executives. We're not going to get there by yelling at our top executives. They have developed a great immune system against yelling, right? So this is part of the system. But we do need people who stand for something to lead towards that. So we need people who will change how their companies work and change how their industries work and change how their professional communities and local communities work. And this led to a reframe for work on climate, a reframe from helping people find climate jobs to helping people develop into climate leaders. Let me give a couple of examples because this is a bit of an abstract concept for many people. One of my favorite examples is our friend Kyler. He is a finance professional, and when he was looking to do something about climate, he did neither of the two things you might expect him to do. So neither did he compete for finance jobs at climate startups, nor did he make his current finance job greener. He did a third thing. The third thing was that he found a new job with a non-climate company. It was a building inspection company. And while joining them, he convinced them to start a new line of business focused on finding energy efficiency opportunities. So this company works with $20 billion worth of real estate. And now, thanks to his leadership, thanks to him, coming and doing this thing that nobody asked him to do, now a good chunk of their business power is decarbonizing the built environment. Another example is what our board member Zoe did during her time at Google. She was a UX content strategist, and likewise, she did neither of the two things. So neither did she quit and find a climate job, at least at the time, nor did she advocate for greener UX. I think that's a total red herring, like greener UX, but that's a separate question. So what she did instead is she started an internal community at Google called Anthropocene that has grown to, I think, about 4,000 people. And this community is a source of power that influences Google's business power. They work by helping Google incubate climate positive lines of business. So, for example, when a team at Google wants to incubate a new climate positive product, but they're under-resourced, or maybe they don't have any resources yet, but they need to test something, they turn to this community, and the community finds some people who have their 20% capacity, and they support it. And so this community has had a big hand in the fact that Google X, for example, now has over half of their projects are actually climate focused. Most people don't realize that. So these are great examples. Another example, me personally, one of the first things I did after leaving Google is I went to an AI conference at which I was presenting my Google work a couple months prior. And I went to the chair of the conference and said, hey, I made this jump. I'm seeing that there is actually a ton of AI companies who are doing something about climate, but you would have no idea by looking at the conference. They should be more represented. So at the time, I was just trying to convince him to do the work themselves. But he said, oh, that's cool, Eugene. Do you want to be the chair of this track? They want to start a new track and chair it. So then for 3 years in a row, we actually ran a climate track at that conference. My point is that it's not even that hard to do this stuff. It's just something that does not occur to most people. There are even more people to whom it does not occur at all that you can work on climate at all. So most people think that this is something where the main mode of action is, yelling and recycling. But even among those people who know that you can work on it, to most people, it does not occur that you can lead because they don't know how, they don't know what, lead towards what exactly. They don't yet identify as a leader. So that is our task at Work on Climate Now. It is to help people develop these key qualities for being climate leaders.
And what are those key qualities? You've provided some powerful examples, and you're working to create a scalable way to dial up climate leadership. What does it take to be a climate leader?
So the qualities that I like to describe are the quality of their vision. So that's the difference between saying I want to do something about climate and, for example, I want to start a climate track at a leading industry conference. Or let's say I want to champion a new sustainability standard, or I want to I don't know, change the format of agreements between our company and our supply chain. So fidelity of vision, develop this, and develop their power. Power is a combination of their, positional authority, but even more importantly, do they know the right people in their industry? Do they know influential people? Do they have good trusting relationships with them? Do others, even those who are maybe not so influential, follow and trust them, so that when this person starts a new initiative and asks who's with me, people raise their hand? So that's power. And the third and hardest thing is agency. So this is, do you self-identify as a leader? Do you feel, paralyzed, and do you feel that this isn't the type of work that people like you do? Or do you go and just do shit? So that is a deceptively simple quality. You can, yell at people all you want that you can just do shit. But unfortunately, that's not how this quality is developed. So we are currently, as an organization, on a path to learning how to develop all of these qualities.
Thanks, Eugene. Vision, power, and agency. You double-clicked on agency as being one of the hardest for most people. Vision strikes me as quite challenging as well, particularly because there's so many different problems to focus on, and understanding where you can actually be most useful, where you have the most leverage, where you could have the most impact. That doesn't necessarily seem like it is going to always be intuitive to people. What are you finding in terms of the support that people need and the types of tools or process to help people with that sort of vision development, which is, I believe, not just problem identification, but understanding what the future could look like and how they can be helpful towards it?
Yeah, I find that this is actually a slightly different problem, and a mindset shift is helpful. I think most people are coming at this from the mindset of like, what is the single most impactful thing I can do? And then how can I go and do it? Sounds very sensible, right, on the surface of it, especially to somebody who is quantitatively minded, an engineer or finance person. Like, this is a natural way of thinking. But the thing is that if you're somebody who is just entering this work, the most impactful thing you can do is something that cannot possibly be visible for you right now. You simply don't know yet, and you're not equipped to tackle it anyway, because you haven't dived deep enough into the practice of the industry. You don't know the right people yet. And even if somebody told you that, like, here, this is the most impactful thing you could do one day, the path to it would be very unclear. So I think that a much more helpful framing is to see this as a lifelong path on which more and more options open up to you as you develop these qualities in yourself. And you are increasingly equipped to differentiate between them and to tackle them. So, for example, maybe today there are simply, let's say, no jobs for someone like you at all, and you don't know anybody, and you don't know anything about climate solutions in your industry. Then the only options available to you are the learning options and the network building options. So that's what you should do, because this is an investment in you having more options tomorrow. As you do that, then maybe tomorrow, for example, let's say that you decided, okay, I'm going to build a bit of my power and influence and my capacity to act in the future by, let's say, starting a blog where I just learn in public. And lo and behold, you have a few hundred followers, and you are all brainstorming together about climate action in their industry, and some experts in the industry are coming to you, and you're learning a lot. So now, let's say you have identified a couple of specific levers in the industry, and you have some sense of what could be done about them. And now you're equipped to say, hey, everyone, I'm actually thinking of doing a little experiment on pursuing this thing. And now you have, a few hundred people who trust you, and some of them will come and do it together with you. As you do that, you will get to know even more people. You will learn even more about the industry. And even more importantly, by now you have something going, and you feel like you are somebody who deserves to be doing this work, and somebody who is meant to be doing this work. So as you do that, you start to think bolder, and you start seeing more options as something that you could do rather than something that someone else should do. So I think the more helpful framing is indeed this lifelong cultivation of key qualities that enable you to have options. And then once you do see these options, honestly, differentiating between them is not that hard. I think that the main problem that people face with the paralysis of choice between options is that none of the options actually strikes them as something that they really could work on today. So none of the options seems that feasible or compelling, and they're looking to resolve that tension by somebody, telling them, like, this option, I know that it feels infeasible and uncompelling, but like, that's the thing. If you just work really hard towards that, that's what you should do. And I don't think that that's the process that is healthy to follow.
Eugene, you're 6 years in now to work on climate. What sort of impacts do you think that you can create when you look at the long term of this project, this initiative? Where's it going?
Yeah. So I think that the greatest task in front of work on climate is to spin up the discipline of helping professionals develop as climate leaders. That is something that incredibly few organizations are doing anything about right now. There are a couple of organizations, for example, our close namesakes Work for Climate, or a couple of, a number of people who have done such work internally at their companies themselves. But nobody is really pursuing it in that systematic of a fashion across many sectors and in a full sense of what professionals, pursuing the full spectrum of how professionals can lead, pursuing the full spectrum of what it takes to help them lead in that way. We are small and we're not equipped to do the whole thing either, but our ambition is to be a really big catalyst for this whole discipline rather than to do a little bit of it. This is actually a recurring mindset of mine, which is both a blessing and a curse. Like whatever I do, I tend to do it in the context of a grand, ambitious vision while acknowledging that I'm probably being arrogant. I can't actually make the whole thing happen. But I guess I could compare it to somebody who maybe was excited by the idea of one day building AI. And maybe today this person is in a time when the transistor was just invented. So maybe this person has a hypothesis that I have no idea what AI is going to look like. The word AI doesn't exist yet, but I think it's going to be about computation. So I'm going to be developing the abilities of transistors to do computation. Like tomorrow, I'm going to work towards helping them add numbers. Then, as I've learned that, I'm going to help them, build real programs. Then maybe I'll build a spam classifier. Then I'll build a more sophisticated image classifier. And then as you walk on this path, which is completely invisible at the beginning, all you have is the compass that computation is going to be key to it. Gradually, we're actually pretty close to it. And I think it's the same here when it comes to the path to a regenerative economy. And I realize we haven't yet talked about what it is. But my belief is that something that will be absolutely key to it is the key principle of regenerative economics, which is called empowered participation. It means that people and their organizations are seen not just as a resource to be strip mined by some higher level system, but they have a say in what they do and in what the system does. And basically, the economy is made of people and organizations that stand for something. And the regenerative economy is, in a sense, like an economy where this property holds all the way from the very bottom to the very top. So my belief is that in order to build an economy like that, it is going to be about empowered participation and about leadership by people who stand for something. So that is the discipline that we must develop.
Okay. I'm glad that you brought up regenerative economics. Definitely wanted to really pick your brain on this and make sure that we walk away with a clear understanding. A lot of people are familiar with, or at least have heard the term regenerative agriculture, but the idea of regenerative economics is bigger. Help us orient around what it is, where it came from, and what it actually looks like in practice.
Yeah. So let's look at why regenerative agriculture is called regenerative. What does it regenerate? What it regenerates is it regenerates soil health as opposed to industrial agriculture practices that just kind of optimize for the maximum short-term yield at the cost of degrading soil health. And today you got a large yield, but tomorrow you need to pour even more fertilizer in there, or maybe you need to give up this field entirely because there is no soil left. So regenerative agriculture is a set of agricultural practices that regenerate the health of the soil. It also regenerates the resilience of your crops to various risks and diseases and weather disasters and so on. And it also happens to at the same time regenerate the health of the climate system by sequestering carbon. It's an agricultural practice that is centered on the principle that as the economy of agriculture goes, it makes the system it relies on healthier. So a regenerative economy simply generalizes that idea to everything else. What if we had an economy where basically the harder it goes, the healthier it gets? Ultimately, there can be no greater purpose to any economic activity than making the economy healthier. That seems like a self-evident truth. And regenerative economy simply takes this seriously, and it is a discipline that asks, okay, how do we make an economy that is structured in this way, that has this property? I think that not even the staunchest capitalists would say that our economy today has this property at large. They might say, like, in some cases it holds, but like overall, everybody can understand that there is such a thing as tragedies of the commons, where if the economy lacks the capacity to manage health of its systems in a coordinated way, the systems will degrade. I think what particularly staunch capitalist types tend to say is, this is just the way it is, let's give up and do nothing about it. I think that is honestly remarkable that people say that, because they're so innovative and high agency in other areas of their life, and here they just give up. Sad and funny to me. But so a regenerative economy is a discipline that takes this seriously and asks, how do we build an economy that has this property? And when it comes to the actual how, so there we can ask, well, has anyone done this before? And it turns out that there are actually many examples. Some of them lay in human societies. So there have been many human societies that built, for example, massive regenerative food systems for themselves, like Los Angeles-sized agriculture and aquaculture and so on systems, where thanks to these people's presence in that area, it's not just that they were like so small scale that they lacked the capacity to do damage. They were not small scale, they were large scale. But the way that they ran their economy, they made it healthy as they went. So they increased biodiversity and soil health and food nutritiousness and their own community cohesion and so on. So there are examples in the realm of human societies. But some of the most compelling examples come from the history of life on Earth itself. Life has existed on Earth for billions of years, and a lot of things have been tried. And it turns out that some of the things have been very successful at long-term survival and resilience. And this isn't to say that like everything that happens in nature is a Kumbaya Disney movie. There is death, there is collapse, there is entire evolutionary branches being cut off. But if we are looking for examples when some ecosystem has survived for a very long time, all of those examples are in natural systems. And it is those examples that we must learn from. For example, the Amazon rainforest been around for probably 50 million years. So we can look at it and say, wow, 50 million years. Nobody can say with a straight face that our economy is going to have that kind of track record. How do they do that? What are the principles that help this ecosystem be so resilient in the long term? These principles have been studied extensively by ecologists and biologists and so on. And increasingly, they're being studied by economists too. And this is the discipline of regenerative economics. It asks which of those principles can translate to our economy and what does it look like in practice to translate them. And there are like some of these principles are like quite easy to understand. For example, it is like a nested network of ecosystems where at each level the incentives of the system and of individuals are aligned. Or for example, another of the principles is that resilience comes not from like powerful protection, but from diversity. So that if one thing dies, another thing hasn't died, and others kind of pick up the flow of life, and so on. So a regenerative economy is based on these principles.
Eugene, reimagining and rewiring an economic system is really a rather massive undertaking. And I'm not sure I can think of something as big or challenging given how deeply entrenched and dependent on today's form of capitalism we are. What needs to happen to build towards a regenerative economy?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing I'm going to say is going to be a little bit cliche, but the first thing that needs to happen is we must understand that it is possible. I just finished reading this book over here by Tom Chi. He is one of the co-founders of Google X, and now runs a climate venture firm, and generally is probably one of the, if not the smartest person I've met in my life. And one of the quotes in this book is that the current form of shareholder capitalism has existed for about 50 years, and there are refrigerators that have existed for longer than the current form of the economic system. Right, so it's a recent thing. It is as a result of change, and change can continue. So it is a design problem, and we can continue the design. This isn't to say that it's easy, because obviously the system has evolved into a form where it resists attempts to redesign it. But when it comes to a relatively practical path for how we can get there, I can tell you my narrative of what that path looks like. So I think that the path looks relatively similar to the path that the development of life took. So life started from a soup of single cells. Then there was a soup of multi-cell organisms that turned out to be even more successful and thrived in combination with a single cell soup. Then animals formed and plants. Then they formed into ecosystems. Humans appeared and humans formed their own ecosystems. So the point is that as we went in this process, it was not a path of just some animals outcompeting others. For example, the elephant, it is not just a really competitive bacteria. Right? An elephant is something at an entirely different level of organization. So this was a path of increasingly complex organization into healthy structures. And the health of natural ecosystems and their ability to last for 50 million years comes from the way that they're organized, not from being very competitive. Like there is a place for competition as well, because it selects between different structures for which one is healthier. But the really big jumps come from increasing the level of organization. In our economy, it's not like we lack complex organization. We have it. We have C corporations, we have labor unions, we have democratically governed nations, we have various forms of communities, we have various managerial practices, various legal practices. So these are all kind of the structures, the glue, the structural patterns that hold our economy together. In a meaningful sense, these are, I think, the DNA of our economy. So there is like the C corporation gene, the safe note gene, the advanced demand pre-commitment gene. And it just turns out that some of these genes are unfortunately cancerous. So they're very good at growing right now. They're very good at killing everything that isn't the cancer. And it looks successful until you see that the cancer has consumed the body and the body is dying, and now the cancer is dying too. Like if it wasn't dying, maybe it wouldn't be so bad. But the bad thing is that it's going to die. In nature, when this happens, natural selection takes its course and we're like, okay, this didn't work out. A different branch is going to take over. In human society, luckily, we don't have to be at the mercy of just death and try again. We can direct this process intentionally, but we must know what is it that we're being intentional about. And I think right now we are collectively very much stuck in a paradigm that innovation is innovation on products. And that's a very narrow frame. That's, to use another cliche, that's like saying that innovation in transportation is innovation on horses. So we need to direct our attention to innovation on the way that we work together, on the structures themselves. So we can see like, okay, looks like the shareholder stock corporation is actually not so good. Let's try to come up with something different. We can say that, for example, the traditional way of financing a supply chain, it doesn't exist. We mostly finance company by company. Can we come up with something better that can finance a whole healthy supply chain? Can we come up with a new financial vehicle? We can observe that, for example, the way to finance the development of a community today, the way that development banks do it doesn't seem to be working out very well. Can we come up with a different facility? The way that we govern water resources doesn't seem to be very good. Can we come up with something different? The way that democracy functions is not very good. Can we come up with something different? And the answer in all of these cases is yes, we can, and there are experiments alive right now. But the point is that we must recognize that this is the work. This is the discipline of innovation that we must work on. And we need to also, while we work on it, we need to acknowledge that it needs to not just be good by itself. For example, if we come up with a new form of corporation, it's not enough for it to be good and living up to our ideals. It needs to have the claws and the teeth to win in a fight to death with the immune system of the current economy. So it is by no means easy, but we have done it before in other disciplines. Again, returning to the development of AI all the way from transistors, we navigated that path by continually having some vision, but by being continually grounded in practical problems. And for the first couple of decades, there were a bunch of curmudgeons who were saying like, what is this digital innovation? That's nonsense. It's not going to work. Innovation is when you make a new chemical. Innovation is when you make a new engine. And, look who's laughing now. So we very successfully solved a lot of practical problems, and now the whole economy is digital. So I think the same thing is going to happen, but we need to be we need to have the right compass. And the right compass exists. We just need to really work hard at it.
Eugene, you bring up AI. We should go there, because if you are working to transform a system, it's probably better to do it at a moment of disruption than at a moment where everything is really stable and static. And many people would argue that we actually are rewiring the economic system through AI. And I'm curious how that plays into your vision, the narrative, sort of the timeline that you see for introducing and perpetuating regenerative economic principles as part of that rewiring.
Yeah, the way I see the role of AI in the economy right now is I think that our economy is headed towards death, and AI presses gas on that. So it is a force that is uniformly accelerating everything in the system. There are some people who say, like, look, it can optimize battery storage for clean energy. Yes, it can, but it can just as well optimize fossil fuel exploration. It can just as well optimize propaganda that makes it harder to change anything and so on. So it optimizes everything. It is like this neutral force, neutral faceless force that is simply making whatever patterns already existed in the economy, they go faster. I guess one good news about that is that now everyone sees what these patterns are. While previously maybe we were being slowly boiled as a frog, now we're being boiled quickly. And a lot of people are like, dude, we're being boiled. What the hell? So that's kind of the bad news. I really wish that we had never invented this technology, or at least not until the economy is regenerative, because the regenerative economy would have put it to positive uses. But now that it's there, I think another frame we need to break out of is the frame of adapting. So I think most people think, like, how can I, the economy is what it is, how can I adapt? That's not the mindset that's going to get us to anything good. Now that AI is here, we need to be asking how we can use this technology to bring about a regenerative economy. And the credit for, if we succeed, credit for that is not going to be with AI. Credit is going to be with the people who are applying AI to those uses. But I think it does actually hold a lot of potential. So one of our board advisors, Merad Yagmai, recently made a very interesting post on LinkedIn where he makes the point that one of the hardest things about transitioning about in general navigating today's world, and especially transitioning to a regenerative economy, is dealing with the complexity and the subjectivity of everything that's going on around us. And our current tools that are optimized for like almost mathematically computable single metrics, they're not working anymore. We lack the structures that can deal with that complexity. But AI makes it possible to deal with that complexity. So it makes it possible to look at a bunch of subjective things and summarize them together. Previously, they had to be in the same data system, in the same format, or in the same organization. So I think AI can be a powerful technology to apply for these new emerging forms of complex organization in the economy. For example, maybe previously you really wanted to run some kind of community input gathering process to figure out how your community should tackle a challenge. And previously, to do that, you needed to hire 5 expensive human facilitators. Maybe now you can hire 1 expensive human facilitator and support them with new innovative AI tools for input gathering and synthesis. Right? Or maybe previously you needed likewise to coordinate in your supply chain to deploy regenerative agricultural practices. And previously, it all had to be in exactly the same data system. So you were spending 5 years adopting the same data system throughout your supply chain. Now this coordination can be made much simpler because thanks to AI tools, it doesn't have to be the same system. So that is the positive application I see for it.
Eugene, we're also living in a moment of disruption coming from Washington. And I know that you wrote recently about the EPA ruling that it would no longer regulate greenhouse gas emissions. And we'll provide a link to your article in the show notes. It's a really thoughtful piece, but give us a quick overview. What are your takeaways from that ruling, and how does it complicate the move towards a regenerative economy?
Yeah, interesting question. I think that as the piece says, I think the impact of the EPA ruling, it is easy to think that all it takes away is the government's ability to regulate emissions. We were really counting on the government to please regulate emissions and, to knock a stick on the polluters' heads. And now the government is not going to do that, but it's not like the government was really doing that. And we weren't really hoping that the Trump government was going to do that anyway. Even if it had that authority, it would probably hardly be using it. So really the much more scary thing and concerning thing about this repeal, this ruling was providing a shared reality and shared tools that enabled other people to coordinate. For example, let's say that a community wants to deploy electric vehicles, right? Or wants to deploy decarbonized building technologies. it is good for the community. It's a good investment. It's a financially good investment, because if you do it, then eventually your energy bills are lower, your people suffer less from respiratory disease, and your community is more economically competitive, because one day gas-powered vehicles will be gone, and if you've been investing in something that's now gone, not good. But it's an investment, and getting buy-in on this investment. Buy-in on this investment is required for many different stakeholders in your community, and in order to make it happen, you need the stakeholders to agree and coordinate. And this coordination, quite crucially, relies on a shared reality. It's much harder for stakeholders to coordinate if there is nothing that they can point to as like, hey, this is like a trusted third party that we all rely on. And previously, the EPA and other US government bodies were, for example, acknowledging that climate is a problem. They were providing some climate risk data. And these people who are trying to coordinate could point to the data and say, like, hey, people, we all agree that this is a problem in these ways. Now let's just get to the business of solving it. Now they need to turn to other parties that are not as universally trusted as the US government used to be, or they need to establish trust from the ground up themselves. So this is basically the point of the repeal. I think that's the point, not just the effect, is to cripple coordination capacity. And for that reason, I think it is the coordination capacity that is the task of our time, in exactly the ways that I was describing earlier. So we must invent new ways for people and organizations and communities to come together in service of goals having to do with the health of their systems. And it doesn't even have to be just climate. Even if we learn how to do this in the realm of public health, or in the realm of community financial health or something else, it is still progress in the development of this really important discipline.
Eugene, this has been a really thoughtful and nuanced conversation, and full of ideas and big thinking. And it makes me really curious. Aside from the Tom Chi book that you mentioned, what else are you reading?
Yeah, I have a whole bookshelf of books that I feel very strongly and passionately about. So another one I want to bring up is a book by another of our board advisors, David J. It's called Relationality. It's a really mind-blowing book. It talks about, it's not like just a feel-good book about how important relationships are. It's a book about how to build relational infrastructure. So it's a book that goes into the mechanics of what relationships actually do, what is the function that they play in society, in the way that our society operates, what is the mechanics of how they form, how do you design structures and spaces and containers that make that process go faster and more effectively. And then once you have a network of relationships, what are the mechanics of how it can be mobilized towards a common cause, and how do you make it more likely to be mobilized towards a common cause? So this book, I think it should be the Bible for anyone who is interested in pursuing the discipline that I'm describing. Really fascinating. I've read it probably 3 times, and I'm probably going to read it again. And another book that's coming up for me that I'm on my second reading of right now, it's called Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. This book is one of the timeless classics in education. It's probably the most cited book in all of education theory. So the book has a distinct Marxist tone, but that's not what it is about for me. Really, the core message of the book is that the traditional model of education that he calls banking education is flawed. Banking education means the model of education where there is a teacher and students are like piggy banks into which knowledge is being deposited, and they're just passively receiving that knowledge deposited by the teacher. This is very similar to still prevalent view that education is about adapting to the world. So like the teacher deposits knowledge into you and deposits kind of resources into you that help you adapt to the way the world is. And he is talking about how education must take a different orientation, which is development of, he calls it liberatory education. So that is education that is, on one hand, rooted in the actual specific problems that you people are facing. So people who want to receive education, they receive it not because the teacher has spoken that this is what they must know, but because they are facing certain problems that they recognize as problems, and they see being educated as a tool to address those problems. And this means that the agency is in their hands about addressing those problems. And education has to be grounded in how they see those problems themselves. and not in how the teacher sees them. So for me, this is a very transformative book that I think, honestly, I have been to a large extent operating in the banking model. Like I like, I find some pleasure in, thinking of myself as a thought leader and so on, right? And that's a shitty model for what I'm actually trying to do. So the right model for what I'm trying to do is the way that really successful movements work, which is they work incredibly closely with the people grounded in their immediate needs. I recognize on an intellectual level that this is how it must go. This book is helping me to kind of rewire my psychological circuits to be ready to actually do it this way.
Eugene, let's close out with a call to action. For people that want to get involved or support your organization work on climate, what should they do? And more generally, what should people inspired by your message be doing today?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, this discipline needs resources, and not just us. Everyone who is doing this work needs resources. This type of work is invisible not just to the current, shareholder capitalism, but it's invisible to today's philanthropic paradigms as well, because today's philanthropy is largely about, either policy, advocating for policy, or scaling specific technology products. And the type of work that we're talking about here is simply invisible. It's not that they don't like it, it's that it doesn't fit into their framework, so they lack the ability to support such work. So that needs to change, and people need to pioneer investing into this discipline, and then those who are developing it. When it comes to people who do not control significant resources, my call to action to them is to develop yourself as this type of leader. So develop yourself as somebody who, first of all, takes a mindset of transformation rather than adaptation. So you see the systems that are around you not as something just that's the way it is, but as something that has been created by humans, and you are a human, and your task and mission is to make it better, and you can. So developing that agency in yourself and developing other leadership qualities in yourself, and start leading the systems around yourself to change towards something. You don't have to try to change the whole world or the whole United States, but even if you change your community or your particular team, that is a step towards you playing a role as one of the pioneers of this discipline, right? Of this discipline of how we humans can work together in service of health, and how can we keep doing it at larger and larger scales while staying healthy. So essentially develop your skills as a leader, and especially as a network and movement leader. Yeah, read the book Relationality, read another book called Impact Networks that goes into the details of how to organize people around common goals and really work towards systemic change. And start doing it. You will learn a lot more from doing it.
Eugene, thank you for this really inspiring, thoughtful conversation. Best of luck, and looking forward to seeing you again soon.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jason.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Invested in Climate. Please remember to rate us on Apple, Spotify, or Google. Find show notes, sign up for updates, get in touch, and visualize your climate action at investedinclimate.com. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial, accounting, or legal advice. Thanks again.